What if everything you were told about power was a lie designed to keep you powerless? Pay very close attention, because what you are about to hear in the next 60 minutes will dismantle every comfortable illusion you have been carrying about morality, leadership, success, and the invisible forces that truly govern human behavior. This is not a motivational speech. This is not a self-help sermon. This is a surgical dissection of reality, cold, unflinching, and precise. There exists a book, a small book, barely 100 pages in most editions. It was written over 500 years ago by a man who had been tortured, exiled, and stripped of everything he had built. And yet, this tiny volume has terrified popes, inspired generals, scandalized philosophers, and shaped the strategies of every serious player in the game of power for half a millennium. Kings kept it on their nightstands. Dictators underlined its passages. Presidents quoted it in private while condemning it in public. The book is called The Prince. The man who wrote it was Niccolò Machiavelli. And the reason it still unsettles people to this day is not because it teaches evil. It is because it tells the truth. A truth that most people are too fragile, too sentimental, or too deeply invested in their own delusions to accept. You have heard the name Machiavelli before. Of course you have. It has become an adjective, Machiavellian, and it is almost always spoken with a tone of disapproval, as if the man were some kind of villain, whispering poison into the ears of tyrants. That is the first lie you need to unlearn. Machiavelli was not a villain. He was a diagnostician. He looked at the world, at the way people actually behave, not the way priests and poets wish they would behave. And he wrote down what he saw, nothing more, nothing less. And that is precisely what made him dangerous. Not his cruelty, his clarity. Now here is where your journey begins, because you are not here by accident. Something brought you to this video. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe you have been feeling somewhere deep in your gut that the rules you were taught about how the world works do not match the world you actually live in. You were told that if you are kind, people will be kind to you. You were told that hard work always gets rewarded. You were told that honesty is the best policy, that good things come to those who wait, that virtue is its own reward. And yet, you have watched people less talented than you climb higher. You have seen liars prosper, while the truthful get punished. You have been loyal to people who discarded you the moment you were no longer useful. You have played by the rules, and the rules played you. That dissonance, that gap between what you were promised and what you experienced, is not a flaw in you. It is a flaw in the map you were given. And Machiavelli, 5 centuries ago, drew the real map. But here is the problem. Almost nobody reads The Prince correctly. They skim a few quotes, hear the word Machiavellian, and walk away thinking they understand it. They do not. They have absorbed a caricature, a cartoon villain version of one of the most penetrating analyses of human nature ever committed to paper. Schools teach it as a historical curiosity. Philosophy professors debate its ethics as if it were a moral treatise. Political commentators cherry-pick lines to score points in arguments. None of them get it. Because The Prince was never meant to be a philosophy book. It was never meant to be a moral argument. It was written as a strategy manual, a field guide, a set of operating instructions for anyone who finds themselves navigating a world where the stakes are real, the competition is ruthless, and the consequences of naivety are destruction. That is exactly how you are going to receive it today. Not as theory, not as history. As a weapon you can carry with you into every room you enter, every negotiation you face, every relationship you navigate, and every decision that will define the trajectory of your life. Let us begin with the context, because context is everything. Without it, you will misunderstand the medicine by ignoring the disease it was designed to treat. The year is 1513. Italy is not a country. It is a chessboard, a fractured landscape of city-states each one scheming against the others, each one vulnerable to invasion from the great powers of Europe. France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, they all see Italy as a prize to be carved up and consumed. Florence, Machiavelli's home, is caught in the middle. It is wealthy, cultured, brilliant, and militarily weak. A jewel surrounded by wolves. Machiavelli had spent 14 years as a senior diplomat and political operative for the Florentine Republic. He negotiated with kings. He observed armies. He watched alliances form and shatter in the space of a single meal. He saw, up close, what happens when leaders are guided by wishful thinking instead of cold assessment. He saw cities fall because their rulers trusted the wrong people. He saw republics crumble because their leaders were too virtuous to do what survival demanded. He saw men of extraordinary talent destroyed by a single moment of sentimentality. And then, in 1512, the Medici family returned to power in Florence. Machiavelli was arrested. He was accused of conspiracy. He was thrown into a cell and subjected to the strappado, a form of torture where your arms are tied behind your back and you are hoisted into the air by them, dislocating your shoulders. He endured this. He did not confess, because there was nothing to confess. Eventually, he was released, but he was broken. Not in spirit, in circumstance. He was exiled to his small farm outside the city, stripped of his position, his influence, his purpose. Picture this. A man who had been at the center of power, who had shaped the fate of a republic, who had walked the corridors where history was being written, now reduced to spending his days arguing with woodcutters and playing cards in a tavern with men who could barely read. And every evening he did something extraordinary. He described it in a letter to his friend Francesco Vittori, and the passage is one of the most remarkable confessions in all of literature. He wrote that each night, before entering his study, he would remove his mud-caked ordinary clothes, the clothes of his humiliating daily existence, and put on the robes of a courtier. Dressed as if he were about to meet a king, he would sit at his desk and enter into conversation with the great minds of antiquity. For 4 hours, he wrote, he felt no boredom. He forgot every worry. He did not fear poverty. Death itself did not terrify him. He was entirely absorbed in his work. That work was The Prince. Do you understand the significance of this? The book was not written from a position of power. It was written from a position of loss. It was forged in exile, in pain, in the furnace of a man who had seen everything stripped away and who refused to let that experience be meaningless. Every word in The Prince carries the weight of a man who has touched the machinery of power, been crushed by it, and then turned around to draw its blueprints so that others might navigate it with open eyes. This is not the work of a cynic. This is the work of a realist who loved his city so deeply that he refused to lie to it, even when the truth was ugly. And that is the first lesson you must absorb before we go any further. The Prince is an act of love, disguised as an act of ruthlessness. It is a father telling his child that the world contains monsters, not to scare the child, but to prepare the child to survive. Now, you may be wondering why this matters to you. You are not a Renaissance prince. You are not governing a city-state. You do not have armies to command or popes to outwit. Or do you? Think about your life. Really, think about it. You exist in a landscape of competing interests. Your workplace is a court, complete with alliances, betrayals, favorites, and those who smile to your face while sharpening their knives behind your back. Your social circle is a network of shifting loyalties. Your romantic relationships are negotiations of power, vulnerability, and influence, whether you acknowledge it or not. Every single day, you make decisions that either strengthen your position or weaken it. Every interaction is a move on the board. The difference between you and a Renaissance prince is not the nature of the game. It is the scale. The dynamics are identical. The psychology has not changed. Human beings in the 21st century are driven by the same forces that drove them in the 16th. Fear, ambition, vanity, self-interest, the desire to be loved, the terror of being insignificant. Machiavelli understood this with a precision that is almost frightening. And The Prince is his distillation of that understanding into actionable principles. But here is the critical point. The Prince is not a book of evil. Say it again to yourself, because the programming runs deep. The Prince is not a book of evil. It is a book of clarity. It does not tell you to be cruel. It tells you to understand cruelty, where it comes from, when it is used against you, and when, in extreme circumstances, a calculated dose of it might be the only thing standing between you and annihilation. There is an enormous difference between a person who is kind, because they are afraid of conflict, and a person who is kind, because they have assessed the situation and determined that kindness is the most strategic response. The first person is weak. The second is dangerous. Machiavelli is teaching you to be the second. Let that sink in. The majority of people walk through life in a state of strategic unconsciousness. They react. They follow scripts written by other people. They absorb beliefs about right and wrong that were designed not to make them powerful, but to make them manageable, to make them predictable, to make them easy to control. Think about it. Who benefits when you believe that ambition is selfish? Who benefits when you think that asserting your needs is rude? Who profits from your guilt, your hesitation, your reflexive deference to authority? Not you. The person who benefits is the person who has no such hesitation. The person who smiles at your politeness while taking what you were too timid to claim. Machiavelli saw this game. He saw it 500 years ago, and he wrote it down with the calm precision of a surgeon describing an operation. And now you are going to see it too. Over the course of this video, you are going to receive The Prince not as a dusty historical text, but as a living, breathing strategy manual for the world you actually inhabit. We are going to dismantle it chapter by chapter, principle by principle, and at the end, you will possess something that cannot be taken from you, a framework for seeing the world as it truly is, and for moving through it with a power that comes not from force, but from understanding. This is not about becoming heartless. Hear that clearly. This is about becoming awake. There is a version of you that has been operating with half the information, reacting emotionally to situations that demand strategic thinking, trusting blindly in environments that reward discernment, and giving away power in moments where you should have been accumulating it. That version of you has served its purpose. It brought you here. And now it is time to let it go, to let. The first principle Machiavelli lays down in The Prince is one that most people skip over because it seems too simple. But it is the foundation upon which everything else is built. It is about the nature of power itself, how it is acquired, how it is maintained, and why most people who gain it lose it almost immediately. Machiavelli divides states, and by extension, any position of authority or influence, into categories based on how they were obtained. Some are inherited. You were born into them. Your family name carries weight. Your position was handed to you. Others are acquired through your own ability. What Machiavelli calls virtù, a word that does not mean virtue in the moral sense, but something closer to skill, competence, strategic excellence, and the sheer force of will required to impose your vision on a chaotic world. And here is the first cold truth. Inherited power is the easiest to maintain, but the most fragile in a crisis. If you have always had something, you do not know how to fight for it. You do not understand the mechanics that created it. You are like a person living in a house they did not build. Comfortable, yes, but helpless when the foundation cracks. Acquired power, power you seized through your own intelligence, effort, and strategic action, is harder to establish, but far more resilient, because you understand every brick. You know where the walls are weak. You know what threatens the structure because you are the one who built it. Apply this to your own life. Have you ever noticed that people who were handed success often crumble at the first real challenge? The executive's child who inherits the company but cannot handle a genuine crisis. The person born into wealth who falls apart when they face real adversity for the first time. Contrast them with the person who built something from nothing, who scraped, strategized, adapted, and forged their position through sheer force of capability. That person is not just successful. That person is armored. They have been tested by the process, and the process made them unbreakable. Machiavelli is telling you something crucial here. Do not envy those who were given their power. Pity them. Because they are sitting on a throne they do not understand, and the first serious storm will sweep them away. Your struggle, your years of building, failing, learning, and rebuilding, that is your true wealth. Not because struggle is noble, because struggle is educational. It teaches you the architecture of power in a way that inheritance never can. But there is a subtlety here that most readers miss. Machiavelli does not simply praise ability and dismiss fortune. He acknowledges, with the unflinching honesty that is his signature, that fortune plays a role, a significant role. He compares fortune to a raging river. When it floods, it destroys everything in its path. And this is the critical insight. A wise leader builds dams and levees during times of calm, so that when the flood comes, its force is channeled rather than catastrophic. You cannot control fortune. You cannot predict every crisis, every betrayal, every shift in circumstances. But you can prepare. You can build systems, habits, alliances, and capabilities that function as your levees. Structures that absorb the impact of chaos and redirect it in ways that serve you rather than destroy you. How many people do you know who live without levees? They drift through life with no contingency plans, no savings of social capital, no alternative strategies. Everything is fine, until it is not. And when the flood comes, they are swept away, bewildered, blaming fate for their own lack of preparation. Machiavelli has no sympathy for them, and neither should you. Not because compassion is weakness, but because their fate is a lesson you must learn from, not repeat. This brings us to one of the most controversial and most misunderstood passages in the entire book. Machiavelli writes about Cesare Borgia, a figure who, by any conventional moral standard, was a monster. Borgia used deception, violence, and political manipulation to carve out a kingdom in central Italy. He betrayed allies. He had enemies assassinated. He employed a brutal enforcer named Ramiro de Orco to pacify a rebellious province through terror. And then, when the province was subdued and the people's hatred was directed at Ramiro, Borgia had the man publicly executed, his body cut in half and displayed in the town square. Horrifying. Undeniably. And yet, Machiavelli holds Borgia up as an example of strategic excellence, not moral excellence. Strategic excellence. Why? Because Borgia understood something that most people refuse to face. The world does not care about your intentions. It only cares about your results. And the results Borgia achieved, stability, order, the creation of a functioning state out of chaos, were real. The methods were ugly. The outcome was effective. Now, before you recoil, understand what Machiavelli is actually doing here. He is not telling you to become Cesare Borgia. He is telling you to study Cesare Borgia the way a medical student studies a disease. Not to spread the disease, but to understand its mechanisms so thoroughly that you can protect yourself from it, and, when necessary, use controlled doses of its logic to survive in a world that is far less civilized than it pretends to be. This is the intellectual leap that separates those who truly understand the prince from those who merely react to it. Machiavelli is operating at a level beyond morality, not against morality, but beyond it. He is asking a question that most people are too comfortable to ask. What actually works? Not what should work in a perfect world. Not what we wish would work. What actually works in the world as it exists, populated by human beings as they actually are, flawed, self-interested, capable of extraordinary nobility and breathtaking cruelty, often in the same afternoon. If you can hold that question in your mind without flinching, without retreating into comforting platitudes about how people should behave, then you are ready for what comes next. Because The Prince is not a single lesson. It is a system of lessons, each one building on the last, each one designed to strip away another layer of illusion and replace it with operational clarity. And the deeper you go, the more you will realize that the most Machiavellian thing you can do is not to become ruthless. It is to become real. To see the board as it actually is. To recognize the moves being played around you. The flattery, the manipulation, the strategic kindness, the calculated cruelty. And to respond not with emotion, but with precision. That is the gift Machiavelli offers you, not a sword, a lens. A way of seeing that transforms every interaction, every relationship, every decision from a blind reaction into a conscious strategic choice. And most people will never accept this gift. Not because they cannot understand it, but because understanding it requires them to abandon the most comforting lie of all, that the world is fair, that good people are rewarded, and that if you just follow the rules, everything will work out. It will not work out. Not automatically, not without strategy, not without the cold, clear-eyed understanding that Machiavelli spent his life perfecting and his exile distilling into one of the most powerful documents ever written. You are still here. That tells me something about you. It tells me that you are willing to trade comfort for clarity, that you would rather see the world as it is than as you wish it were, that somewhere inside you there is a hunger for the kind of knowledge that does not soothe. It sharpens. Good. Because we have barely scratched the surface. What comes next is where the prince transforms from a historical curiosity into a weapon you will carry for the rest of your life. We are going to explore the specific principles, the tactics of leadership, the psychology of influence, the architecture of power, that Machiavelli encoded in this deceptively small book. Principles that apply not just to princes and politicians, but to you, in your career, in your relationships, in your daily confrontation with a world that rewards the strategic and punishes the naive. Stay with me, because if you understood what was just said, truly understood it, not just intellectually, but in your bones, then something has already shifted. A door has opened, and what waits on the other side is not darkness. It is sight. Now that you understand the man and the machine he built, it is time to open it up, piece by piece, gear by gear. What follows are the core principles Machiavelli encoded into The Prince, not as abstract philosophy, but as operating instructions for navigating a world that has not changed nearly as much as you would like to believe. The first principle that demands your attention is perhaps the most dangerous idea in the entire book. Machiavelli writes that a leader must learn how not to be good. Read that again. He does not say a leader must be evil. He says a leader must learn how not to be good, and use that ability when necessity demands it. This is the razor's edge. This is where most people fall off. Because society has conditioned you to believe that goodness is a permanent state. Something you are, not something you choose. You are taught that good people are always kind, always honest, always generous, and that any deviation from that script makes you a bad person. Machiavelli obliterates this illusion. He understood that goodness, when it becomes rigid, becomes a cage. A person who cannot adapt, who is incapable of being firm when firmness is required, of being silent when truth would be weaponized against them, of being cold when warmth would be interpreted as weakness. That person is not virtuous. That person is vulnerable. And in a world full of people who have no such limitations, vulnerability is not admirable. It is an invitation. Think about your own life. How many times have you been too nice? Not genuinely kind, too nice. There is a critical difference. Kindness is a choice made from a position of strength. Niceness is a compulsion driven by fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of rejection. Fear of being seen as the villain in someone else's story. And every time you defaulted to niceness, when the situation demanded something harder, you paid a price. Maybe someone took advantage of your generosity. Maybe a colleague stepped over you because they knew you would not push back. Maybe someone you loved mistook your tolerance for permission to keep disrespecting you. Machiavelli is not asking you to become cruel. He is asking you to become complete, to have access to the full spectrum of human response, from genuine warmth to strategic coldness, and to deploy each one precisely when the situation calls for it. The lion and the fox, force and cunning, generosity and restraint. A complete human being is not someone who is always gentle. It is someone who can be anything the moment requires, and who chooses their response with the precision of a surgeon choosing an instrument. This leads directly to one of the most quoted and most butchered passages in The Prince. The question of whether it is better to be loved or feared. Everyone knows the line. Almost no one understands it. Machiavelli says that ideally, a leader should be both loved and feared. But if you must choose, and life will force you to choose, it is safer to be feared than loved. Why? Because love is fickle. Love depends on the other person's feelings, and feelings change. People who love you today will forget you tomorrow if loving you becomes inconvenient. Fear, on the other hand, is held in place by a dread of consequence that never weakens. But here is the part that everyone forgets. Machiavelli adds an immediate and crucial qualification. You must be feared without being hated. This changes everything. Hatred is reactive, volatile, and eventually leads to your destruction. The hated leader creates enemies who are willing to sacrifice everything, even their own safety, to bring him down. Fear, properly managed, is not about terror. It is about respect reinforced by consequence. Apply this to your world. You do not need people to tremble when you enter a room, but you do need them to understand that your boundaries are not suggestions, that your word carries weight, that there are consequences, real, consistent consequences, for crossing you. Not anger, not revenge. Consequences. Calm, measured, and inevitable. The person who is merely loved is at the mercy of everyone's mood. The person who is feared, with respect, not hatred, has created an environment where their presence commands attention and their absence creates uncertainty. That is power. Not the power of a tyrant. The power of a person who is taken seriously. And how do you cultivate this? Not through aggression. Through consistency, through the quiet demonstration that you will not be moved by guilt, by flattery, or by emotional manipulation. When you say no, it stays no. When you set a boundary, it holds. When you make a promise, you deliver. And when you make a warning, you follow through. Over time, this builds something far more valuable than popularity. It builds a reputation. And in Machiavelli's world, and in yours, reputation is the single most powerful currency you possess. Machiavelli dedicates significant attention to the management of reputation, and his insights here are staggeringly applicable to modern life. He understood that perception shapes reality far more than reality shapes perception. People do not respond to who you are. They respond to who they believe you are. And the gap between those two things is where strategy lives. Consider this. You may be extraordinarily competent, but if you are perceived as weak, your competence will be overlooked. You may be genuinely generous, but if you are perceived as a pushover, your generosity will be exploited, not appreciated. Conversely, a person of moderate ability who manages their reputation with skill will consistently outperform someone of greater ability who neglects theirs. This is not about deception. It is about curation. You already curate your reputation whether you realize it or not. Every email you send, every meeting you attend, every interaction you have is broadcasting information about who you are. The question is whether that broadcast is intentional or accidental. Machiavelli would tell you to make it intentional. Decide what you want people to believe about you, and then behave in ways that consistently reinforce that belief. Not through words. Words are cheap, and people instinctively distrust them. Through actions, through the small, repeated demonstrations that encode a narrative in the minds of those around you. Do you want to be seen as reliable? Then never miss a deadline. Not once. Do you want to be seen as someone of consequence? Then stop over-explaining yourself, stop apologizing for having standards, and stop filling silence with nervous chatter. Do you want to be seen as a leader? Then make decisions. Make them calmly. Make them quickly, and stand behind them even when they are unpopular. The accumulation of these micro-behaviors, over time, constructs a reputation that functions as armor. People will project onto you qualities you may not even possess. Competence, confidence, authority, simply because the pattern of your behavior has trained them to see you that way. This is not manipulation. It is communication. You are teaching the world how to perceive you, and the world, being lazy and pattern-seeking by nature, will obey. Now, Machiavelli takes this principle further with one of his most provocative assertions: a leader must be a great pretender and dissembler. Before you recoil at the word pretender, understand what he means. He is not advocating pathological lying. He is recognizing a fundamental truth about human social dynamics. People judge by appearances, and very few have the discernment to look beyond them. The world is full of people who see the surface and never dig deeper. A wise person uses this to their advantage. Not by fabricating a false identity, but by controlling which aspects of their identity are visible and when. You do this already. You behave differently at work than you do with close friends. You present a different face to a potential employer than you do to a sibling. This is not hypocrisy. It is social intelligence. Machiavelli is simply asking you to do it with awareness rather than instinct. To choose your masks consciously rather than wearing them by default. The person who shows everything to everyone is not authentic. They are unstrategic. Authenticity, in its most misused modern sense, has become an excuse for emotional incontinence, for dumping your fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities on anyone within earshot and calling it real. Machiavelli would have recognized this for what it is: a surrender of strategic advantage disguised as a virtue. True strength is selective transparency. You decide who earns access to your inner world. You decide when vulnerability serves your purposes and when it undermines them. You decide which doors to open and which to keep sealed. That is not dishonesty. That is sovereignty. Let us move to another pillar of Machiavellian strategy, one that applies directly to your professional and personal life: the management of alliances. Machiavelli warns, with almost prophetic clarity, about the dangers of relying on others for your power. He calls them mercenaries and auxiliaries, forces that fight for you, but whose loyalty is conditional, temporary, and ultimately self-serving. In his time, these were literal hired armies. In your time, they are the people who support you only when it costs them nothing. The friends who cheer for you when you are winning, but vanish the moment you stumble. The colleagues who align with you when your star is rising but abandon you, or worse, turn against you, the second the wind shifts. Machiavelli's advice is unequivocal. Build your own army. Metaphorically speaking, this means developing your own capabilities rather than depending on borrowed ones. It means cultivating genuine skills, not just networking connections. It means having something, knowledge, talent, resources, competence, that is entirely yours, that cannot be taken away by a change in management, a shift in social dynamics, or a betrayal by someone you trusted. The person who depends entirely on their network is one betrayal away from zero. The person who depends entirely on a single employer is one restructuring away from irrelevance. The person who depends entirely on a relationship for their identity is one breakup away from collapse. Machiavelli is telling you to build internal infrastructure. Make yourself so capable, so skilled, so irreplaceable in your core competencies that even if every external support were stripped away tomorrow, you would still be standing. Not comfortable, perhaps, but standing. And from that foundation, you can rebuild anything. This is not paranoia. It is preparation. The difference between the person who thrives through adversity and the person who is destroyed by it is rarely talent or luck. It is infrastructure. The quiet investments you made in yourself, the skills you developed, the knowledge you accumulated, the financial reserves you built, the emotional resilience you cultivated. These are your levees. And when Machiavelli's raging river of fortune floods your life, they are what will keep you above water. Now, let us address one of the most practically applicable sections of The Prince, Machiavelli's analysis of cruelty. This is where most people check out. The word itself triggers a moral reflex that shuts down analytical thinking. But stay with me, because what Machiavelli says about cruelty is not what you expect. He distinguishes between two types: cruelty well used and cruelty badly used. Cruelty well used, and he acknowledges the paradox of calling any cruelty well used, is cruelty that is applied once, decisively, in the service of securing your position, and then replaced with policies that benefit those under your authority. Cruelty badly used is cruelty that is applied gradually, escalating over time, keeping people in a constant state of uncertainty and resentment. The modern translation is this: if you must deliver a difficult truth, if you must set a hard boundary, if you must make a painful decision, do it once, do it cleanly, and do it completely. Do not drag it out. Do not soften the blow so much that the message is lost and you have to repeat it. Do not deliver bad news in installments, each one worse than the last, each one eroding trust and building resentment. Think about the manager who fires an underperforming employee after months of vague warnings, passive-aggressive hints, and uncomfortable meetings. By the time the termination happens, the entire team is demoralized. The employee is bitter and blindsided, and the manager's reputation for decisiveness is in ruins. Contrast this with the manager who has a clear, direct conversation early, sets explicit expectations, delivers honest feedback, and if change does not happen, makes the difficult decision swiftly and with respect. The second manager seems harsher in the moment, but in the long run they are kinder, because they did not prolong the suffering. They did not let ambiguity breed false hope. They treated the other person as an adult, and they preserved their own authority in the process. Machiavelli understood that the avoidance of short-term discomfort almost always creates long-term catastrophe. The leader who cannot deliver a clean blow, who flinches, delays, equivocates, is not merciful. They are weak, and their weakness does not spare anyone pain. It multiplies it. This principle extends far beyond the workplace. In your relationships, the inability to have difficult conversations, to say what needs to be said clearly and without apology, is not kindness. It is cowardice dressed as consideration. And the price of that cowardice is paid in resentment, confusion, and eventual collapse. Be willing to be the villain for 5 minutes if it saves everyone months of silent suffering. That is Machiavelli's lesson, not cruelty for its own sake, clarity so decisive that it cuts clean and allows healing to begin immediately. There is another dimension to the prince that is often overlooked because it is less dramatic than the discussions of force and deception. But it is perhaps the most important practical lesson in the entire book. Machiavelli repeatedly emphasizes the importance of studying. Not studying in the academic sense, though he valued learning. Studying in the sense of relentless observation and analysis. He advises the prince to study the terrain, literally, in terms of geography, but metaphorically, in terms of understanding the landscape in which you operate. Know the people, know the dynamics, know the history, know the patterns. He tells the story of Philopoemen, a Greek general who, even during peacetime, would walk through the countryside with his officers, pointing to hills and valleys and asking, if the enemy were positioned on that hill, how would we attack? If we were trapped in that valley, how would we escape? He was constantly gaming out scenarios, testing strategies in his mind, preparing for conflicts that had not yet materialized. This is not obsessive worry. It is strategic imagination, and it is a practice that separates the exceptional from the average in every domain of life. The entrepreneur who succeeds is the one who has already imagined the 10 ways their business could fail and built safeguards against each one. The negotiator who wins is the one who walked into the room having already anticipated every argument the other side could make. The person who navigates a social crisis with grace is the one who had already thought through the dynamics before they occurred. Most people do not do this. Most people operate reactively. Something happens, and they scramble to respond. They are perpetually surprised by developments that were entirely predictable. And then they call it bad luck, or blame others, or retreat into helplessness. Machiavelli has no patience for this. And if you are serious about building a life of strategic competence, neither should you. Develop the habit of mental simulation. Before every important meeting, every difficult conversation, every significant decision. Game it out. What are the possible responses? What are the second-order consequences? What is your contingency if things go sideways? This is not anxiety, this is preparation. And the person who prepares while others sleepwalk will consistently outperform them, not because they are smarter, but because they are readier. Let us also address Machiavelli's views on generosity and parsimony, because this principle is wildly relevant to your everyday life. Machiavelli argues, counterintuitively, that a leader is better off being considered miserly than generous. Why? Because the generous leader, in order to maintain a reputation for generosity, must constantly spend on gifts, on favors, on displays of wealth. Eventually, this drains their resources. And when the resources run out, they must either raise taxes, impose on others, or curtail their spending, appear to have become stingy. Either way, the reputation they were trying to protect is destroyed. The miserly leader, by contrast, conserves resources carefully. They spend where it matters, strategically, purposefully, and refuse to waste capital on appearance. Over time, people see that this leader can afford to be generous when it truly counts, because they did not exhaust their reserves on pageantry. Translate this to your life. The person who says yes to everything, every favor, every invitation, every request for their time and energy, is not generous. They are depleted. They have no reserves. They cannot help anyone meaningfully, because they have spread themselves so thin that every commitment receives a fraction of their attention. And eventually, they burn out, become resentful, and withdraw, and everyone around them feels betrayed by the sudden change. Contrast this with the person who guards their resources, time, energy, money, emotional bandwidth, with strategic discipline. They say no frequently. They are selective about their commitments. And when they do say yes, the full force of their attention and capability is behind it. Their generosity, because it is rare, carries weight. Their help, because it is not automatic, is valued. This is not selfishness. This is sustainability. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of generosity and the reality of generosity are often in direct conflict. The person who looks generous, who is always giving, always available, always saying yes, is frequently the least effective giver. The person who looks careful is often the one whose contributions truly matter. Guard your resources. Invest them where they create the most impact. And do not apologize for refusing to waste your finite energy on obligations that serve nothing but your fear of being perceived as selfish. Here is where the threads begin to weave together, because every principle we have discussed, the need to learn how not to be good, the calculus of fear and love, the management of reputation, the building of self-reliance, the clean application of difficult decisions, the discipline of study and preparation, the strategic conservation of resources. All of these converge into a single, unified understanding. Power is not a thing you possess. It is a game you play. And the game has rules that no one will teach you unless you go looking for them. Machiavelli wrote those rules down. Not all of them. No single book could contain them all. But the foundational ones, the ones that, once understood, allow you to read every other situation with clarity. And here is the coldest truth of all, the one that separates those who will use this knowledge from those who will merely admire it. Knowing is not enough. You must practice. You must take these principles out of the realm of theory and into the arena of your daily life. You must start making different choices, harder choices, more strategic choices, and you must accept that those choices will sometimes make you uncomfortable. They will sometimes make others uncomfortable. And that discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are doing something real. The comfortable path is the path of least resistance. It is the path of niceness, of compliance, of going along to get along. And it leads, without exception, to a life of quiet frustration, a life where you are managed by those who had the courage to be strategic while you were busy being agreeable. Machiavelli offers you a different path. It is harder, it requires more of you, but it leads somewhere the comfortable path never can, to a life where you are not a piece on someone else's board, but a player, aware, intentional, and in command of your own moves. But the coldest move, the most precise application of everything we have discussed, that is still ahead. Curious how this applies to the situations you face every single day. How these 500-year-old strategies translate into conversations, negotiations, and decisions you will make this week. Stay with me, because what comes next is where theory becomes weapon. Everything you have absorbed so far has been preparation, the foundation, the architecture of understanding. Now it is time to descend from the tower of theory and step into the arena where these principles meet flesh and blood, where Machiavelli's words stop being ideas and start becoming actions. Let us begin with the arena you navigate most frequently, your professional life. You walk into your workplace every day, and whether you admit it or not, you walk into a court. There are hierarchies, spoken and unspoken. There are alliances being formed in hallways. There are favors being traded over coffee. There are people who smile at you while calculating how to use your work to advance their own position. And there are people who genuinely want to help you, but even their help comes with an unspoken ledger. Machiavelli understood courts. He spent 14 years navigating one of the most treacherous political environments in European history, and his first piece of operational advice for anyone entering such an environment is this: never reveal the full extent of your capabilities. This feels counterintuitive. You were taught to showcase your talents, to prove your worth, to make sure everyone knows how smart and capable you are. But Machiavelli saw what happens to people who do this. They become threats. The moment you demonstrate that you are exceptionally competent, you trigger two simultaneous responses in those around you. The first is admiration. The second is fear. And fear, in a competitive environment, quickly transforms into a desire to neutralize you. The colleague who realizes you are more talented than they are does not celebrate your brilliance. They begin to worry about their own position. The manager who sees that you could potentially replace them does not mentor you more closely. They begin, often unconsciously, to limit your visibility, to assign you tasks that keep you useful but not prominent, to ensure that your light does not outshine theirs. This is not cynicism. This is pattern recognition. And the strategic response is not to hide your abilities entirely. That leads to irrelevance. The response is to calibrate. Show enough to be valued. Hold enough back to be underestimated. Let people see 80% of what you are capable of. Keep 20% in reserve. Your hidden arsenal, your contingency, the capabilities you deploy only when the stakes are highest and the impact will be undeniable. Here is how this looks in practice. Your manager asks for a report. You deliver an excellent report, thorough, clear, ahead of schedule. But you do not also redesign the entire reporting system, suggest a restructuring of the department, and CC the vice president on your innovations. You solve the problem you were given with excellence and restraint. You build a reputation for reliability without triggering the alarm bells of ambition. Then, when the moment is right, when a crisis hits, when a high-profile project needs a savior, when the opportunity aligns with your goals, you unleash the 20%. And the impact is seismic, precisely because no one expected it. You have been underestimated, and now that underestimation becomes your advantage. You are promoted not as a threatening competitor who clawed their way up, but as a quiet revelation, someone who was always capable but chose this moment to reveal it. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly. It is the principle of the fox, achieving your objectives through intelligence and timing rather than brute display. Now let us talk about a situation you face regularly and almost certainly handle wrong. The moment when someone disrespects you. It happens in meetings, in conversations, in the small cutting remarks that people disguise as jokes, the dismissive tone, the interruption, the credit stolen, the subtle suggestion that you are less than. And your typical response, the response most people default to, falls into one of two categories. Either you swallow it, smile, and pretend it did not happen. Or you react emotionally, snapping back with visible anger or hurt that gives the other person exactly what they wanted. Proof that they have power over your emotional state. Both responses are losing moves. Machiavelli teaches a third option, the strategic pause. Here is what it looks like. Someone makes a cutting remark in a meeting. Instead of reacting, instead of laughing it off or firing back, you pause. You look at them, not with anger, not with hurt, with stillness. You hold their gaze for one beat longer than is comfortable, and then you continue as if they had not spoken. Or, if a response is required, you respond to the substance of the conversation, calmly, competently, without acknowledging the emotional provocation at all. What does this achieve? It communicates, without a single word of confrontation, that their attempt to destabilize you has failed. It signals that you are operating on a level where petty provocations simply do not register. It forces the other person, and everyone watching, to recalibrate their understanding of you. You are not someone who can be baited. You are not someone who can be rattled. You are someone who controls the temperature of the room rather than being controlled by it. And here is the deeper Machiavellian insight. The person who tried to disrespect you will be more unsettled by your calm than they would have been by your anger. Anger is predictable. It is a known quantity. It tells them exactly where they stand. But silence, composed, unreadable silence, is terrifying. Because they do not know what it means. They do not know what you are thinking. They do not know what you might do. And that uncertainty is the purest form of power there is. Practice this, not once, not as a trick, as a discipline. Train yourself to respond to provocation with stillness, not suppression. You are not burying your emotions. You are choosing, deliberately, not to let someone else's behavior dictate your response. You are breaking the chain of stimulus and reaction. You are inserting a space between what happens to you and what you do about it. And in that space, you become untouchable. Let us move to another scenario, negotiation. Whether you are negotiating a salary, a contract, the terms of a relationship, or simply deciding where to have dinner, the principles are the same. Machiavelli's cardinal rule of negotiation is this: the person who needs the deal less controls the deal. This is the principle of strategic indifference, the ability to walk away, or at least to convincingly project the ability to walk away, regardless of how much you want the outcome. Here is the practical application. You are interviewing for a job you want. Every fiber of your being wants this position. Your instinct is to show enthusiasm, to demonstrate your eagerness, to make them feel how badly you want it. This instinct is wrong. It is tactically catastrophic. The moment you reveal the depth of your desire, you hand the other party your leverage. They know you will accept a lower salary. They know you will tolerate worse conditions. They know they do not need to compete for you because you have already competed yourself into the ground. Instead, walk in with an energy that says, "I am interested, but I am not dependent. I would enjoy this role, but my world does not hinge on it." Ask thoughtful questions about the company, not to impress them, but to assess them. Let the interview feel like a mutual evaluation, not an audition. Mention, casually but clearly, that you are exploring several options, not as a bluff, as a reality, because you should always be exploring several options. The person with one option has no power. The person with multiple options can afford to be selective, and selectivity is magnetic. This applies to relationships as well. The person who needs a relationship the least has the most influence within it. Not because they care less, but because their identity is not dependent on the other person's approval. They can set boundaries. They can have difficult conversations. They can walk away from dysfunction. And the mere fact that walking away is a genuine possibility, not a threat, but a calm reality, changes the entire dynamic. Machiavelli would not phrase it this way, but the principle is identical. The person who controls the exit controls the room. Now let us address one of the most dangerous situations you will encounter, one that Machiavelli devoted significant attention to because he saw how reliably it destroys people. Flattery. Machiavelli warns, with almost desperate urgency, against the flatterer. He calls flattery one of the greatest diseases a leader can suffer, because it attacks the one thing you cannot afford to lose: your perception of reality. Here is what makes flattery so insidious. It does not feel like an attack. It feels like validation. When someone tells you that you are brilliant, that your idea is revolutionary, that you are the best leader they have ever worked with, your brain lights up. You feel seen. You feel appreciated. You want more. And once you want more, you become dependent on the person providing it. You start making decisions not based on what is strategically sound, but based on what will keep the praise flowing. This is how empires fall. This is how companies collapse. This is how intelligent people make catastrophically stupid decisions. They surround themselves with people who tell them what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. Machiavelli's solution is elegant and ruthless. He says you must select a small number of trusted advisors and give them explicit permission to tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. And then, critically, you must actually listen. You must create an environment where honest feedback is not just tolerated, but rewarded, and where flattery is recognized for what it is, a soft weapon designed to blind you. In practical terms, this means seeking out the people in your life who are willing to disagree with you, not the ones who argue for the sake of arguing or who undermine you out of jealousy, the ones who care enough to risk your displeasure because they value your success more than your comfort. These people are rare. They are priceless. And when you find them, protect that relationship with everything you have, because they are the only thing standing between you and the slow, sweet poison of self-delusion. At the same time, become ruthlessly honest with yourself about the flattery you receive. When someone praises you, ask, what do they want? When someone agrees with you too quickly, ask, are they thinking or are they performing? When everyone around you seems to love every idea you have, ask, is it possible that I have simply surrounded myself with mirrors? The discipline of questioning praise is harder than the discipline of enduring criticism. Criticism stings, but it sharpens. Praise soothes, but it softens. And a soft mind is a useless mind in a world that demands edge. Let us now turn to a principle that Machiavelli illustrates through one of the most vivid passages in The Prince, the proper use of timing. Machiavelli tells us about the difference between the prince who acts decisively at the right moment and the prince who hesitates until the moment has passed. He uses numerous historical examples to drive home a single, relentless point. In the affairs of power, delay is almost always fatal. Here is why. When a problem is small, when a threat is just emerging, when a conflict is still a whisper, it is easy to address. A small amount of decisive action is sufficient. But most people do not act at this stage. They wait. They hope the problem will resolve itself. They avoid the discomfort of confrontation. And by the time they finally act, the problem has grown. The whisper has become a scream. What could have been handled with a single conversation now requires a crisis intervention. This is the pattern of failure in businesses, in relationships, in every domain of human activity. Small problems left unaddressed become large problems. Large problems left unaddressed become catastrophes. And at each stage, the cost of action increases while the probability of a clean resolution decreases. Machiavelli's prescription is clear. Act early. Act decisively. Do not wait for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment is almost always now. Or more precisely, the perfect moment was 5 minutes ago, before you started deliberating. In your career, this means addressing underperformance immediately, not after months of hoping it will improve. It means having the difficult conversation with your business partner today, not next quarter. It means raising the concern in the meeting, not sending a cautious email afterwards. In your relationships, this means naming the problem when it is still small enough to discuss calmly. It means saying, "This bothered me," when it happens, not letting it fester until it erupts in a catastrophic argument 3 months later. It means bringing up the uncomfortable topic when the discomfort is still manageable, not when it has calcified into resentment. Every time you delay a necessary action, you pay interest on the delay, and that interest compounds. Machiavelli understood this with the clarity of a man who had watched kingdoms fall because their leaders chose comfort over confrontation. Do not be that leader. In your own kingdom, your career, your household, your inner world. Do not let small fires become infernos because you were too polite or too afraid to extinguish them when a single cup of water would have sufficed. Now, let us discuss a mistake that Machiavelli identifies with particular scorn, a mistake that is so common, so normalized, that you probably commit it regularly without recognizing the damage it causes. The mistake is this: trying to please everyone. Machiavelli addresses this through his analysis of neutrality. He tells the story of leaders who, faced with a conflict between two powerful parties, tried to remain neutral, to avoid alienating either side by committing to neither. And in almost every case, this strategy failed catastrophically. Both sides viewed the neutral party with contempt. The winners had no reason to reward someone who did not support them. The losers had no reason to protect someone who did not defend them. The neutral party ended up isolated, distrusted, and vulnerable. The lesson is this: in moments that demand a choice, make one, commit, take a position. Because the attempt to stand in the middle, to be all things to all people, to offend no one, to hedge every bet, does not protect you. It erodes you. It signals that you have no principles, no loyalty, and no courage. And in a world where alliances matter, the person with no clear position has no allies. This applies with brutal directness to your social and professional life. The person who agrees with everyone is trusted by no one. The person who avoids all conflict is respected by no one. The person who changes their opinion based on who is in the room is valued by no one. Have the courage to choose. Not recklessly. Machiavelli is not advocating for impulsive partisanship. He is advocating for calculated commitment. Assess the situation. Determine which side aligns with your interests and values, and then commit fully, visibly, and with conviction. You will make enemies. That is inevitable. But you will also make allies, real allies, who trust you because they know where you stand. And Machiavelli would remind you, the person who has real enemies and real allies is infinitely more powerful than the person who has neither. Because at least the person with enemies has a position. They have weight. They exist as a force in the world, rather than as a shadow that everyone can see through. Let us now address one of the most critical errors people make. One that Machiavelli predicted with almost supernatural accuracy. The error of assuming that because someone was your friend in the past, they will be your ally in the future. Machiavelli's view of human nature is consistent and unflinching. People are moved primarily by self-interest. They will be loyal to you as long as loyalty serves them. They will support you as long as supporting you costs less than opposing you. And the moment the calculation shifts, the moment it becomes more advantageous to betray you than to stand with you, most people will betray you, not all, but most. And the pain of that betrayal will be proportional to how much you trusted them without verification. This is not bitterness. It is observation. And the strategic response is not to trust no one. That leads to paranoia and isolation, both of which Machiavelli explicitly warns against. The response is to trust with open eyes, to extend trust gradually, in proportion to demonstrated reliability, to never place yourself in a position where a single betrayal can destroy you, to always have contingencies, alternative plans, alternative relationships, alternative resources, so that no single person holds the key to your survival. In practice, this means diversifying your dependencies. Do not rely on one mentor, one client, one friend, one source of income, one emotional anchor. Spread your foundations wide enough that the removal of any single pillar leaves the structure standing. It also means watching what people do, not what they say. Words are the cheapest commodity in human exchange. People will promise you loyalty, support, love, and dedication. And every word may be sincere in the moment it is spoken. But moments pass. Circumstances change. Incentives shift. The only reliable predictor of future behavior is past behavior under similar conditions. Machiavelli learned this lesson in the most painful way possible, through personal experience. The same Florentine Republic he had served for 14 years abandoned him without hesitation when the political winds changed. The allies he had cultivated did not defend him. The connections he had trusted did not intervene. He was discarded the moment his utility expired, and rather than becoming bitter, he became wise. He took that pain and transmuted it into understanding. He wrote it down so that you would not have to learn it the way he did, through the strappado, through exile, through the cold realization that the loyalty of others is a resource to be valued, but never relied upon absolutely. Carry this with you, not as cynicism, as clarity. Love the people in your life. Trust the people who have earned it. But never forget that you are the only person whose presence in your life is guaranteed. Build accordingly. Let us talk about one more critical application before we move to the final phase of this journey. The art of making enemies. Most people think the goal is to avoid enemies entirely. Machiavelli would call this naive. Enemies are inevitable for anyone who takes a clear position, who builds something of value, who refuses to be a passive participant in their own life. The question is not whether you will have enemies, but how you will manage them. Machiavelli's guidance is precise. First, identify them clearly. Do not pretend that the person undermining you is merely going through a rough patch or doesn't mean it. If their behavior consistently damages your interests, they are an adversary, whether they admit it or not, whether you want to believe it or not. Second, never underestimate them. The greatest danger comes not from the enemy you fear, but from the enemy you dismiss. The person you think is too weak to harm you, too insignificant to matter. That is the person who will strike when your guard is down, precisely because you never thought to raise it. Third, if you cannot eliminate the threat, and in modern life, elimination means neutralizing their ability to harm you, not anything violent, then keep them close enough to monitor. Machiavelli's famous advice to keep friends close and enemies closer is not about befriending your adversaries. It is about maintaining enough proximity to anticipate their moves. If you know what your enemy is planning, they cannot surprise you, and a known threat is always more manageable than an unknown one. Fourth, and this is the subtlest point, some enemies are useful. The presence of an external threat unifies your allies. It gives your team a common purpose. It sharpens your focus and eliminates the complacency that comes from having no opposition. The leader without enemies often becomes soft, unfocused, and vulnerable to the very complacency Machiavelli warns against. So do not fear your enemies. Study them, manage them, and when possible, use them. Let their opposition become the friction that hones your edge. At this point, something has shifted. You can feel it. The principles are no longer abstract. They are maps of your own experience. You are seeing situations from your past through a new lens. The meeting where you were too passive. The relationship where you trusted too completely. The negotiation where you showed too much need. The enemy you underestimated. The flattery you swallowed. The decision you delayed until the cost was catastrophic. This is the transformation that Machiavelli intended. Not a change in your morality, a change in your vision. You are seeing the game now, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But the transformation is not yet complete. There is one final phase, the most important one, because seeing the game is not the same as playing it, and playing the game is not the same as mastering it. What comes next is where everything converges, where the scattered principles unite into a single, coherent way of being, where the reader of the prince becomes something else entirely. Stay, because this final transformation is not just the end of a video, it is the beginning of a different life. You have traveled a long way to reach this point. Think about where you were when this video began. You were a person who understood the world in a certain way, a way that was shaped by other people's comfort, by society's need for you to be predictable, by the comforting lies that every culture tells its members so they do not ask dangerous questions. Now something has fractured. Not you. The lens, the old lens, the one that told you the world was fair, that good intentions guarantee good outcomes, that being nice was the same as being strong. That lens has cracked. And through the cracks, you are seeing something that was always there, something Machiavelli saw 500 years ago with a clarity that still burns. You are seeing the game, not as a conspiracy, not as a reason for cynicism, as a reality. The moves, the counter-moves, the strategies that govern every human interaction, from boardrooms to bedrooms, from political chambers to family dinners. The invisible chess match that most people play without ever knowing they are playing it, and that a rare few play with full awareness, full intention, and devastating effectiveness. You are becoming one of the rare few, and that transformation is not something I can give you. It is something you are giving yourself, simply by staying here, simply by refusing to look away from truths that would send most people running back to their comfortable illusions. Let me tell you what the new version of you looks like, not in some distant future. Right now, tomorrow morning, the next time you walk into a room, you walk differently. Not with arrogance, that is the posture of the insecure, and you can spot it now with ease. You walk with gravity, with the quiet weight of someone who does not need the room to notice them because they have already assessed the room before the room has assessed them. Your eyes move differently. They observe instead of seeking. They take in dynamics, body language, alliances, tensions, the invisible architecture of every social space, and they process it all without reaction. You listen differently. Where you once listened to respond, you now listen to understand. You hear not just the words people say, but the calculations behind the words. When someone offers you a compliment, you appreciate it, and you ask yourself what they want. When someone shares gossip, you enjoy the information, and you note what it reveals about the gossip's loyalties, insecurities, and strategic position. Nothing is wasted on you anymore. Every interaction is data. You speak differently, not more, less. Your words carry weight because you have stopped diluting them. You no longer fill silence with noise. You no longer over-explain yourself, as if your decisions require a defense attorney. You state your position clearly, once, and if someone does not understand or does not agree, you are comfortable with that tension. You do not chase consensus. You create clarity and let others find their own way to it. You decide differently. Where once you agonized, caught between options, terrified of making the wrong choice, you now move with purpose, not recklessly, never recklessly, but with the understanding that a good decision made today is almost always better than a perfect decision made too late. You have internalized Machiavelli's lesson. The cost of delay always exceeds the cost of imperfection. So you decide, you act, and if the action proves wrong, you adjust. Without shame, without self-flagellation, without the crippling perfectionism that keeps most people paralyzed at the threshold of their own potential. You relate to people differently, not coldly. This is the misunderstanding that catches most people. You are not becoming a machine. You are becoming discerning. You still love, you still trust, you still connect, but you do so with your eyes open. You love people as they are, not as you wish they were. You trust people in proportion to what they have demonstrated, not what they have promised. And you connect with the understanding that every relationship is a dynamic system, changing, evolving, requiring maintenance and attention, not a static arrangement you can set and forget. Your generosity has changed. Where once you gave indiscriminately, time, energy, attention, forgiveness, you now give with purpose. Your yes means something because your no means something. The people who receive your investment know it is deliberate and they value it accordingly. The people who once exploited your openness find that the open door has been replaced by one that opens only to those who have earned the key. This is not hardness. This is architecture. You are designing your life instead of letting it happen to you. You are building with intention instead of reacting to circumstances. And the result is something that no one can take from you, because it is not based on external validation, temporary success, or other people's opinions. It is based on clarity, And clarity, once achieved, does not fade. Now let me consolidate the principles you have received, because repetition is the mother of mastery. And these ideas deserve to be etched so deeply into your understanding that they become reflexive. Not things you think about, but things you embody. First, power is acquired, not inherited. Whatever position you hold in life, your true security lies in understanding how you got there, and in your ability to rebuild if it is taken away. Invest relentlessly in your own capabilities. Never outsource your survival to anyone or anything. Second, learn how not to be good, not as a permanent state, but as a capability. The person who can only be kind is as incomplete as the person who can only be cruel. Develop the full range. Deploy each quality with surgical precision based on what the situation demands, not what your fear dictates. Third, it is better to be respected than to be liked. Respect is built through consistency, through follow-through, through the calm enforcement of boundaries. It does not depend on mood or circumstance. It compounds over time into a reputation that precedes you and protects you even in your absence. Fourth, control the narrative. Your reputation is not what you are. It is what people believe you are. Take responsibility for shaping that belief, not through deception, but through deliberate, consistent behavior that communicates the identity you have chosen. Fifth, build your own army. Do not depend on borrowed power, borrowed connections, or borrowed validation. Develop skills, knowledge, and resources that are entirely yours. The person whose power depends on others is the person whose power can be revoked at any time. Sixth, act early and act decisively. Small problems addressed immediately remain small. The discipline of confronting discomfort before it metastasizes is the single most practical skill you can develop for any domain of life. Seventh, choose your side. Neutrality in moments that demand commitment is not wisdom. It is absence. Have the courage to take a position, to commit visibly, and to accept the enemies that come with having allies. Eighth, question every flatterer. Seek out the people who will tell you the truth at the cost of your comfort. Guard your relationship with reality more jealously than you guard any other asset, because the moment you lose touch with reality, every other strength becomes meaningless. Ninth, study the terrain. Develop the habit of strategic imagination. Before every important encounter, think through the possibilities, the responses, the contingencies. Be the person who walks into a room already knowing how to leave it on their own terms. 10th, guard your resources, time, energy, attention, emotional bandwidth. These are finite. Invest them where they generate the greatest return. Say no without apology. Be selective without guilt. Your generosity is only meaningful if you have something left to give. These 10 principles are not commandments. They are coordinates. They mark the position from which you can navigate any situation, personal, professional, emotional, strategic, with clarity rather than confusion, with intention rather than reaction, with power rather than helplessness. And now let us arrive at the paradox that sits at the heart of the prince, like a seed inside a stone. The truth that Machiavelli embedded in his work for those with the patience and the intelligence to find it. The paradox is this: the ultimate Machiavellian move is to not need Machiavellian tactics at all. Let that settle. The highest form of power is not the constant deployment of strategy, deception, and calculation. The highest form of power is becoming so competent, so self-sufficient, so deeply rooted in your own capabilities and clarity, that the games others play around you become irrelevant. You do not need to manipulate when you are genuinely excellent. You do not need to scheme when your work speaks with a voice that cannot be silenced. You do not need to control others when you have mastered the only person you can truly control: yourself. This is what Machiavelli was pointing toward all along, though few readers ever reach this level of understanding. The Prince is not a manual for becoming a manipulator. It is a manual for seeing manipulation so clearly that you transcend it. It teaches you the rules of the game not so that you become a ruthless player, but so that you evolve into someone who no longer needs to play at all, because you have built something so real, so solid, so undeniably yours, that the games of lesser players break against you like waves against a cliff. Machiavelli spent his life studying power. He observed it, analyzed it, codified it, and in the end, the man who understood power better than almost anyone in history chose to spend his evenings in exile, not scheming his way back to Florence, but sitting alone in his study, communing with the minds of antiquity, writing words that he knew would outlive every prince and every kingdom he had ever observed. He chose creation over competition, legacy over leverage, understanding over control. That is the final lesson, the one hiding in plain sight. The master strategist's greatest strategy was to stop strategizing and start building something permanent, something that could not be taken by the Medici or destroyed by exile or erased by time. He built understanding, and he gave it away in a small book, barely 100 pages, to anyone brave enough to read it without flinching. You have done that today. You have read it, through this translation, through this modern lens, without flinching. And that means something about you. It means you belong to a very small category of people. The ones who would rather see the truth and feel the weight of it than live in the comfortable fog where most people spend their entire lives. This is not arrogance. It is responsibility. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you understand the dynamics of power, you cannot pretend they do not exist. And once you accept that the world operates by rules that most people refuse to acknowledge, you have a choice to make. You can use this knowledge to dominate others, to climb, to manipulate, to win at any cost. Machiavelli would not judge you for this. He understood the temptation. Or you can use it for something higher. You can use your understanding to protect the people who do not have it, to lead with clarity instead of ego, to build organizations, relationships, and communities that are strong because they are honest about the forces at play, not because they pretend those forces do not exist. You can be the leader who is feared without being hated, because your people know that your firmness comes from a place of care, that your boundaries are drawn not to limit, but to protect, that your strategic mind serves not your ambition alone, but the good of everyone in your orbit. That is the Machiavellian paradox in its full expression. The person who understands power most completely is the person most capable of using it wisely. Not because they are more moral than others, but because they have no illusions about what they are wielding. They see the weapon in their hand, they respect its weight, and they choose, with full awareness, to use it for construction rather than destruction. Machiavelli wrote The Prince for a specific man, Lorenzo de' Medici, the new ruler of Florence. He hoped it would earn him a return to political life. It did not. Lorenzo barely glanced at it. The man who understood power better than any of his contemporaries died in relative obscurity, never regaining the influence he had lost. But the book survived. It survived because truth has a half-life that extends far beyond the lifespan of any prince, any republic, any empire. 500 years later, you are sitting here, absorbing the same insights that were offered to a Medici who was too distracted to listen, and unlike Lorenzo, you are listening. Do not waste this. The knowledge you now carry is not a decoration. It is a responsibility. Use it. Not tomorrow. Not when the conditions are perfect. Now. In the next conversation you have. In the next decision you face. In the next moment where the old version of you would have hesitated, accommodated, flinched, choose differently. Choose with the clarity that comes from understanding the board you are playing on. You will make mistakes. Machiavelli himself made mistakes. He misjudged the Medici. He overestimated Cesare Borgia. He underestimated the cruelty of fortune. But his mistakes did not diminish him. They refined him. They gave him the raw material for the insights that still illuminate the human condition half a millennium later. Your mistakes will do the same, if you let them. If you treat every failure as data rather than defeat. If you analyze rather than agonize. If you adjust rather than abandon. That is the final quality of the Machiavellian mind, not brilliance. Adaptability. The willingness to look at what went wrong, to understand why, and to incorporate that understanding into the next move. No shame, no self-pity, just the relentless pursuit of strategic improvement, day after day, decision after decision, until the gap between who you are and who you are capable of becoming closes to nothing. You are that person now, not in potential, in actuality. The transformation happened while you were listening, in the moments between the words, in the spaces where the old beliefs loosened their grip and the new understanding took root. Now, before you leave, there is one final thing. If this message reached you, if it bypassed your defenses, your skepticism, your comfort, and landed somewhere deep where it cannot be easily dislodged, then I want you to make a declaration, not to me, not to anyone watching, to yourself. Comment below the phrase, "I see the game, and I play it on my terms." This is not a comment. It is a contract with yourself. A line drawn in the sand of your own consciousness. A marker that separates the person you were before this hour from the person you have become. And by subscribing to this channel, you are not clicking a button. You are joining a fortress. A space where we declare, without apology and without hesitation, that we are ready to see the world as it is. Beautiful and brutal, generous and merciless, full of opportunity and full of traps, and to move through it not as victims, not as bystanders, but as players, conscious, strategic, awake. This is your fortaleza. Return to it when the noise of the world tries to lull you back to sleep. Return to it when the old patterns try to reclaim you. Return to it when you need to be reminded that the clarity you found today is not a passing feeling. It is a permanent shift in how you see, how you think, and how you act. Now go. Carry what you have received. And remember the deepest lesson Machiavelli ever taught. One he never wrote in The Prince, but lived in every letter, every exile, every evening spent in his study, dressed in the robes of a courtier, conversing with the dead. The game of power is not won by the person who controls others. It is won by the person who can never be controlled. The person who has built within themselves a sovereignty so complete that no external force, no betrayal, no failure, no loss can reach the core of who they are. That is the fortress, not the channel, not the knowledge. You are the fortress. Go now, and let the prince be your lens, not your master. Let strategy be your tool, not your identity. Let power be your servant, not your God. And may your clarity be so complete that you never again need anyone to tell you what the truth is, because you will see it, standing right in front of you, exactly as it has always been, exactly as Machiavelli described.